how much of all these components would you recommend in like a typical week? The low intensity, high intensity, and a bit of strength.
Yeah, no, great question.
Tricky one.
When yeah, well, and it's my answer to some of these questions when people ask has to start with it depends, right? Because it's all
Mm-hmm.
individual. But where I would start with you in terms of determining your training is say, okay, well, what's the volume that you're doing right now? So let's say you're doing, 8 hours a week of activity, and on the majority of activity is aerobic effort, this low intensity, and then some of it is maybe higher intensity. Maybe it's some strength training. Maybe it's riding your bike at a higher rate, or even doing some intervals. So, in thinking about how to build that to go from being able to confidently do 1,000 meters of gain to 2,000, or even a 3,000 meter day, a big day on skis. What you really need is to be able to build the total volume of training you're doing. Your body needs to be able to handle a big load, so that it can then handle those specific big loads on skis and mountains. So when you're adding volume to your training, the predominant place to build that volume is the low intensity. And we talk about, when you're looking at the sort of separation of intensities, you want 90 plus % of your total training volume to be at or below that aerobic threshold. That is really going to be the best bang for your buck. So if you're doing 10 hours a week of training, you want about 9 hours of that training to be at or below that aerobic threshold at a pretty low intensity. And then the remaining time might be occupied with some strength, could be some intensity training. But what you start to see is that if you can add more aerobic hours, maybe now you're doing 12 hours of total training, or even up to 15 or 20 hours of total training. If the majority of that is aerobic, it still leaves you time to be able to add these more specific components of strength and high intensity. But again, sandcastle analogy, or the house foundation analogy, the bigger the base, the more work you're able to do. And consequently, the more recovery you need to make sure you build in. You need to, what we think about with training is that the training, the actual activity that you do, gets you tired, right? It fatigues you. It's the recovery process. It's resting after that training that actually gets you stronger. Because the training itself makes you weak. Ultimately, it tires you out. It stresses your body. And then when you recover well, your body adapts to that stress. So imagine as you sort of bend and stress your body, let it recover, back strong.
Yeah.
So each time you train and recover, you get to the next step and you're a little bit stronger. So when things in terms of adding volume to your training, that's a good thing, provided the majority of it is low intensity, and provided that you incorporate recovery at regular intervals. And an easy way to think about it that we often break down for athletes is spend 3 weeks of building your volume up with more activity, and then take a 4th week really easy. Maybe you lower the volume down to lower it by 30 or 40% and have a pretty easy week. Let your body fully recover, and then go back and do another 3 weeks of building volume. And you cycle your training like that, and you'll see yourself start to get stronger and more resilient.
Sounds good. I totally wrote that up so I can, start now with that.
Yeah.
90% below aerobic threshold. Yeah, that sounds all right. It's my favorite thing to do, I guess.
Yeah.
Kind of that, or the deadlift.
Well, what you'll find again is that, particularly when you start, aerobic threshold and that low intensity training is going to feel pretty slow. Right? It's going to perhaps even be frustrating to have to move that slow. Maybe you're not able to go out with our friends as much because they hold back. I got to be at my aerobic threshold. But as you do it more, you're going to be able to move faster at that same effort. And what athletes find time and time again is that as they build their fitness, they can go and do the same activity and the same distance that they used to do at a higher intensity. Now they're doing it at a low intensity, but they're still doing it in the same amount of time. And so you're going to get to the point where spending 12, 15 hours at that low aerobic effort is still going to allow you to do a lot of the objectives that you want to do, and you're going to be doing them more economically. You're going to be able to go longer, move faster for less effort.
At 6 hours currently, do you think I should keep going at that, or like just increase that low aerobic a bit more maybe? Or talking to you makes me think I should do that.
Yeah, I think just I think add each week, think about add an hour, add about an hour each week of low intensity aerobic training, and see how that feels. Basically what you want to think about when you're increasing your training volume is do it in measurable ways, right? So if you're going to increase the volume one week, add an hour of aerobic training and then see how you feel. This is where things like keeping a training log or writing a training diary of how you're feeling is really helpful, because when you get to the end of a week or a couple of week period of training, you can look back at your notes and see how you felt, how you absorbed that training, and that'll help inform what you should do moving forward. If you look back at your notes for a week and the previous 4 days all show, I'm really tired, I can barely get out of bed, I'm exhausted, my muscles are sore, those are really good indications that you've reached the capacity of your body in what it can absorb, and you need to take a rest. And then then you recover and you start again. But if you look back at that training diary and it's seeing, I feel great, I'm handling the training well, I'm feeling strong, then you've got this ability to increase the volume a little bit. So just taking a systematic approach, looking at it in a long-term perspective is really going to bring the greatest benefits.
Could you summarize rather quickly the core elements you've been telling me to do? Because that would be really helpful for the final video on what I learned from the 4,000 meter thing.
Yeah. All right, let's see here. 4 elements. So I'd say the first and most important piece in thinking about preparing yourself better as an endurance athlete is to have a plan. So move from just going out and exercising to thinking about training. So have a plan, name your objective, and then develop an approach toward it. That's number 1. Second thing is to use the idea of aerobic training as your primary goal. The majority of your training, 90% or more of the volume of time that you're training, should be in that aerobic zone. That is going to be the greatest bang for your buck. Number 3 is to make sure that in addition to that aerobic capacity, you lay a really good foundation of strength. And strength includes not only those heavier lifts like squats and deadlifts and building that big muscular strength, which is really valuable, but also doing the single leg strength, the balance, the mobility, what we call functional movement, so that your body knows how to move in a single leg way, in a dynamic way that is going for sport, particularly. And then the 4th piece is to think about how you can sort of sharpen the knife or increase your speed. So once you've got those other foundation pieces in place, you can start doing some selective high intensity training and more specific workouts to get that speed and that power up to a higher point. And when you put all those pieces together over the course of a training period, that's what's going to give you the greatest returns when you get out on the slopes and you start targeting those bigger mountains.